Hello, everyone tuning in, and welcome to our episode of Community Table Talk. The topic for today will be transitioning from homeless to housed. I am very excited to introduce our guest today, who is Amy Wells, who is a housing liaison worker with Lutherwood. So thank you so much, Amy, for joining me.
No worries. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So, as always, we want to start with our land acknowledgement. So, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I host this from today is the land traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. I also acknowledge the philosophies and knowledge of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. So, let's jump right into it. So, a lot of our housing providers have some sort of experience with housing someone off of our priority local status list. And that kind of brings up questions around homelessness and where people are coming from off that list. So, can we just begin by having a conversation about what chronic homelessness actually is defined as?
Sure. So, chronic homelessness, in definition, is someone who does not have a home or a permanent residence for a total of 6 months or more, or 18 months over 3 years. So, we're looking at 180 nights cumulative in a place that is not considered safe, possibly in a shelter, or it could even be counted as couch surfing, just no permanent residence that is stable for them to stay at.
Mhm. And I think that, we have the hidden homeless population, which is something that people sometimes forget about. When someone is coming from chronic homelessness, it's not always the case that they are living rough on the street. There are lots of folks who are just kind of bouncing from couch to couch or spare room to spare room and no real place to call home. And they are still
Absolutely.
considered homeless.
Absolutely. They're a little bit harder for us to find. They are absolutely out there. As you said, they are just couch surfing, hopping from residence to residence. They can stay 3 months at one place, pop to another one, stay there maybe 2 weeks, go to another one. So that's where we kind of look at that idea where there's no stable permanent address for them to be at. And sometimes some of these locations that individuals stay at are not considered safe places. So that's also what we look at. They're not secured units. There's no a guarantee of a tenancy or longevity of them staying there. It could also be places that are not like bylaw approved buildings,
Mm.
which are not safe for individuals, or they could be places that have traffic, a lot of drug trafficking, which also puts a risk to the individuals staying there as well, whether they're partaking or not. There is always those risks. So we do look at those factors as well for homelessness, but we are looking at to be considered chronic that 6 months, 180 nights cumulative in a year, or the 18 months over 3 years where that housing is not a stable residence for them to stay at.
Mhm. Mhm. There are, I would say, some stigma around folks who are chronically homeless. There's kind of the assumption out in the world that folks are unstable or are using substances heavily or are dangerous. So, why do people find themselves chronically homeless?
We find people chronically homeless for a multitude of issues. A lot of people consider the homeless system kind of the catchment system. So when people fall through the cracks of the mental health system, addiction system, the health system, and even the legal system, the homeless system tends to pick them up. So
Mhm.
we have the highest acuity individuals, but that doesn't mean necessarily that they're dangerous. It just means that they have higher needs and they're falling through these other cracks. And that's where we kind of come into place, and we see people who struggle with talking to landlords, struggle with managing their money, struggle with daily living, don't know how to fill in an application. So that's where we come into play, where we're helping those individuals get their documentations ready, helping advocate with them, and helping them navigate through things like lease signings, viewings, all those necessary steps to getting housing that they just weren't able to manage on their own. Some just poor time management skills. Some of them just don't know what to say. Honestly, I've had quite a few older adults, really lovely individuals who are like, I haven't had to rent a house in 20 years. I had a place. and I just don't know what to do now. Like, how do I have this conversation with somebody? So it's really just trying to show them how it works and try and build those skills. But sometimes once I get an individual in front of a landlord, it's amazing what they're able to do and sell themselves to that landlord as a good tenant. They have skills. It's just they don't always know how to use them. And systems are ever changing. So that totally makes sense for people who rented, even 5 years ago. It's a whole different ball game. So, I mean, they just need somebody to help kind of guide them through that whole process. But we are tending to see we're picking up a lot of people who just don't fit in a lot of other systems.
Hmm. Hmm. And I think it's also important to note the region that we're in is extremely competitive for housing.
Yes,
And I don't have to tell you that.
yes, we're in a market right now where we're just seeing unprecedented growth in rental prices and housing prices. I think we're like right now the seventh most expensive city to live in. It's it's sometimes very overwhelming, even for people who have a lot of skills. Like we are seeing people who never have touched the homeless system before becoming homeless because it's unaffordable for a lot of them. So I am
Exactly.
seeing people now that the issue is just affordability. It's not any other skill set. It's just they can't seem to get through. And landlords themselves, because it is such an important investment for them, are very protective of their properties, which it totally makes sense.
Hmm.
But the screening is very, very detailed, and the screenings are sometimes impossible for people. So, I mean, they just can't produce that perfect application every time. And when they're being put up against those coming from the GTA with jobs like engineer, teacher, I actually had a dentist at a viewing once
Wow.
who got the place. It's almost like, yeah, I see why the landlord took them, but why are these people in low income housing markets right now? These are people who should be entering the housing market. What is going on here? So we are hitting a housing crisis where there's just not enough safe, affordable housing, and the competition has skyrocketed.
Hmm. And I think to put that in context, say you're living in a unit for 10 years, there's a certain percentage of rent that can be increased each year. So let's say your rent is now at $1,200 for a 3 bedroom, and the landlord sells the property. So now you're budgeting for a $1,200 unit, and you're going out and bachelor units are $1,200 in this region.
Yep.
So I can imagine we're seeing that influx just because our affordability is not meeting what the demand is right now.
We're also seeing some rent evictions as well, where
Mhm.
landlords will update their units. They want to price it for a much higher point. They'll offer it to the tenant and they can't afford it. Now they're priced out of the market and don't know where to go, what to do, and who can help them because they, as you said, maybe have children or people who live with them need a 3 bedroom, but there's nothing in that price point. In fact, if we're looking at a 3 bedroom, I think we're looking at about $1,700, which $500 more a month has to be coughed up.
Mhm.
And if you are a parent and those rooms were for your children, where's that extra $500 coming from?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I totally understand that. And, that's kind of where I hope this conversation can shed light that, especially now, the reason why people find themselves homeless is so diverse.
Yes,
We're in a booming economy, we're in a lot of very unique circumstances, and people kind of, like you said, fall through those cracks for a multitude of reasons.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, I am seeing people now who, never have been homeless before. This isn't something that they ever saw themselves in this position. But
None of us do.
no, and no one really anticipates it. But a lot of them, I think, are just so overwhelmed by how to do this and what they face right now in the competition market. And it just goes to show how close all of us are to being homeless. Like it's just one circumstance away for a lot of us. So that kind of moves into that idea too of trying to remove some of the stigma attached to chronic homelessness is nobody in the position thought they would be there. a lot of them are embarrassed and feel guilt over being in that position, and really sometimes don't want to ask for help because they want to try and figure it out. But clearly at 6 months, they have no success. They are struggling. And that is something they can't continue to do because survival mode kicks in. And how do you function as a person when you're just trying to figure out where do you sleep every night, right?
Mm-hmm. And that comes up with some of the behaviors that are maybe more associated with folks that are homeless, right? If you have to stay up all night and substances help you do that to keep you safe, then you do what you have to do to get through the night. And that's something to keep in mind.
Absolutely. I have seen individuals who were doing very, very well in their recovery. And as soon as they became homeless, their recovery started again because they had to stay up all night to stay warm so they didn't fall asleep, which could
Yeah.
result in, death if they fall into hypothermia. So they're staying up all night to stay awake, and then they're trying to find a place to sleep in the day while being kind of shooed away by people saying, "Why are you sleeping all day?" It's because they
Yeah.
were up all night just trying to stay alive.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that chronic homelessness or homelessness in itself is a trauma, which brings up a lot of any kind of previous mental health or struggles that people have had. It really exacerbates that. So, when we have someone who has been chronically homeless and has experienced all of the things that we're talking about, or some of the things we're talking about, and they finally get housed, their name finally comes up on the wait list, they are finally in a safe place. What are some of the emotions that someone experiences during that process?
Oh man, it's a multitude, and it's going to vary by the individual, but I've seen anything from someone just crying, overexcited, just overwhelmed by what has been given to them, and just so grateful that they're given an opportunity, to someone who is on the other end of it, scared, unsure, not sure what to do, how to even live in an apartment, and sometimes just very on edge on when is the shoe going to drop and I'm going to lose this again.
Yeah.
So we have very, very different reactions. It does depend on the individual, but I would definitely say the biggest feeling is that overwhelmed, whether it's a positive overwhelm or a negative overwhelmed, it definitely is the first emotion that comes in. Also, a lot of stress. The most stressful time for people is said when people are moving. So double that when someone doesn't have all their documentation, doesn't know where the payments are coming from, doesn't know if they can get the items that they need. Like, it really can amplify it for someone who is chronically homeless. That stress, that moving day is just so much stress. And even the first week, as they're just trying to settle in and figure out where's the doctors, where's the grocery store, like, how do I get blinds? I have to get tenant insurance. How do I do that? So they're just trying to figure out and follow all the requirements of moving. And that can be very difficult for someone who doesn't have all the paperwork or documents necessary, right?
And that first year, coming from a housing background as I am as well, that first year of moving into a new apartment is always the most turbulent. That is a tough time for folks because it's like you said, it's all new, it's all stressful. And I think some of those behaviors can come off to a landlord as seeming ungrateful that they got this place.
Mhm.
You're now housed. Why are you not keeping your friends out? You know that's going to get you evicted. Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you grateful?
Yeah, and I think we need to also look at, well as like the street culture. For those who are really, really ingrained in that type of culture, that's their family. And they think back to when they needed a place to stay for the night, and they think, well, I can't turn down Bob and Sally. Like, they let me stay at a place for like a couple weeks when I needed it. And they really feel guilty saying no, because that is the closest thing they have to a relationship. And when you move somebody in, they're very uncomfortable sometimes because it's new, it's foreign. They haven't had housing sometimes in over 10 years. What is comfortable though are their friends. So trying to bring some comfort into the home is a natural human thing, but we're seeing these negative consequences attached to it.
Hmm.
So I mean, really trying to understand, and it's a lot of work to work with somebody through preventing a home takeover.
Yes. So that will be another segment on community table talk that has its own little segment there. That's a huge topic because that's definitely one of the behaviors that we see. It's also important to note that silence can definitely be uncomfortable for folks. If you've, like you said, if you've been homeless for 10 years, you've always had people around. You are now in a place that's dead silent. You're by yourself. That can be very, very intimidating. Or turning someone down at your door can also be dangerous for that person.
It's true, absolutely. Especially like I'm really relating to the noise one. We have a lot of people who their biggest complaint is music. They're just trying
Hmm.
to fill it. And like it's just such a human thing. Some people don't, they're very unsettled by noise. And a lot of people are like, well, why don't you do something else? Well, they don't actually have anything else. They don't have internet set up. They maybe can't afford cable or Netflix. Like it takes time and all they have is this little radio or this little boom box. So I mean, there's a lot of people who are quick to judge, "Why can't you do something else?" But realistically, they can't afford it or don't have it. So they're just trying to do what they can to be comfortable and relax.
Hmm. Yeah, I completely understand that. Again, as coming from a housing background, that was a lot of complaints, and people are saying, I'm lonely, I'm bored, I don't like this. This is something so foreign to me. I need to make it feel a little bit more like home, wherever that home has been for the last X amount of months being homeless.
Absolutely. I even have a gentleman who, when he was first housed, when I went to go visit him, he actually was sleeping outside in the morning, and I was like, "What are you doing out here?" And he's like, "Well, I slept here last night." I said, "Well, could you not get in your apartment?" He said, "No, I can. I just sometimes I'm more comfortable sleeping out here because it's more familiar to me than my apartment. I've only been in my apartment 6 months. I've been sleeping outside for 15 years."
Mhm.
So there's really that mindset that some of them are in. It's not institutionalization, but it's a very similar kind of psychology behind living outside and being in survival mode that long, which is why preventing chronic homelessness is so important and having those preventative steps. Because when someone gets into that almost institutionalization of homelessness, they are now ingrained in that survival mode much longer. And it takes a very long time for someone to readjust to a new living.
Yes, we've seen it where, someone has come from tent city and actually set their tent up in their unit, and that can be very off-putting if you're a landlord coming in and going, what's happening here? But it's one of those things where we need to be creative and allow people to find their way into making their home theirs, while still respecting the unit itself and the neighbors and the landlord and all of those regulations that they're meant to follow.
Yep.
Mhm. So, are there any other challenges that chronically homeless individuals who are now housed face that we haven't touched on yet?
Sometimes the stigma with the neighbors. I do
Mm.
find if neighbors find out that they were homeless, there is sometimes a lot of judgment that is placed on them, and sometimes a lot of stigma and a lot of rejection. A lot of people don't understand it, think that homelessness is always their fault, and that there must be like a defect in somebody, and there's a lot of mistrust because humans fear what they don't understand, right? So when people don't understand why someone is homeless, they become afraid. So we have seen that where the buildings have been very outraged by someone moving in who is coming from a priority list. And it's really trying to have conversations in order to try and make our participants who are coming from homelessness feel more comfortable, even though they may be walking into an environment that already is prepared to reject them. So it's really trying to have those conversations about, what are we looking at here? What can we do to have people understand who you are? So we actually have a peer coach on our team who helps walk alongside somebody having experienced the same things they have: homelessness, addiction, mental health. They are meant to be role models of someone coming out the other side. And what Chris sometimes does is offer to bake cookies with the individuals to offer to neighbors and as like a way for neighbors to see the person underneath the stigma,
Mhm.
just to try and have people see the good person that they are and not the image that they think that they are. There's a lot of projection sometimes on what they think um, our participants will be like. And I can tell you a lot of the times the people I work with are some of the nicest, kindest, sensitive people I've ever met, and some of the funniest. And I really don't think that they deserve the stigma that gets attached to them. I mean, they have barriers and they have high needs, but some of them are just so lovely. And we have this thing every week in our meetings with heartfelt moments, and they are filled with all kinds of lovely moments with our participants who do amazing, amazing things.
Hmm. And I wish everyone was able to kind of experience that from, the housing provider side of things, because housing providers are just inundated all the time with crazy amounts of work. And, you have so many units that you're taking care of. And I think that sometimes people just don't have an opportunity to stop and get to know their new tenants as, the people that they really are, because what we present like under pressure is very different than, who we are sitting in our living room having a coffee, and I wish well, I hope these segments help encourage people to explore that a little bit more, whether it is a housing provider or, OW worker or just a community member.
Absolutely. And like I said, a lot of the times it's when you have so much work to do and you have so many clients and you don't really get to have time to get to know people, I could absolutely see how um, it's hard to miss those nuances. And some of our workers, we obviously see our participants on a very intensive level, sometimes more than once a week for extended periods of time. So I mean, we do get to see those nuances, and I'm glad that we have this segment here to bring out and share our perspective on it because I mean, the people that we have met, they're so lovely, and some of them so thankful. They don't know how to say it sometimes, and they just don't know how to express it. And I think providers need to hear that these individuals that they are giving a home to are grateful. They don't want to lose it.
Mhm. Mhm. And some people just don't know how. They don't
Exactly.
know
Some
how
people
to maintain that housing.
exactly. They don't know, especially when they have two conflicting ideas of I really want to be housed, but as you said, if we go back to the home takeover idea, how do I turn down those who helped me back when I needed help? How do I have a moral code? Do I not have a moral
Mhm.
code? It's actually a very philosophical problem for a lot of participants that I don't think a lot of us have experience in dealing with. And it's a hard position to figure out how do we keep their integrity, but also protect that housing. It's actually an answer I don't know if we have yet ourselves.
Yeah.
It tends to be very individualized at this moment, but the more we talk about it, the more prepared we are to deal with it, and the more likely we'll have successes in, overcoming that issue.
Mhm. So let's talk about preparedness a little bit. For housing providers who may have chronically homeless individuals coming into those units, what can housing providers do in order to make that transition easier?
So what I would say is our participants are very stressed out when this happens. And usually when they're getting offered a unit, it's in a whirlwind. It's not like you get a month's notice or 2 months notice. It's like you got approved, you're going to sign a lease tomorrow and you're going to move in 3 days.
Yeah.
Like it's very, very quick. And I would like providers to know that this can be very overwhelming for people and very, very stressed out. So we are asking that they be flexible, especially if they're attached to a program like Lutherwood with supports in what they ask for from our participants, because sometimes it can be a lot, and that can really start to build on their coping mechanisms and even um, their mindsets. And we don't want to send them into a building with a negative mindset. We really want to set them off on the best foot possible. So sometimes making sure key fobs work is really helpful. When they don't, it really does set some people back. We're looking to see about making sure that if there is something missing that a provider needs, to let the worker know, and we will work on getting that, because sometimes the individuals don't have all that paperwork up front to just hand over, or they don't know where it is, or it's in the storage facilities that they have to go get their stuff at. They don't have transportation. Sometimes storage facilities are out of town. It's very, very difficult. So we do ask for some patience from providers that if Lutherwood is attached, you will get your documentation. Not a problem. It just does take some time. Our individuals are sometimes, a little bit scattered because their lives have been scattered, right? Like they may have left Waterloo at some point and that was their last housing. That's where everything is stored. And they're now moving into Kitchener or a township like Elmira. How do they get from point A to point B with very little money, right? And get that paperwork or have the time, especially when the move is in 48 hours.
Mhm.
So we do ask that there's a little bit of flexibility with providers. Same with payment. We will always make sure payment is received. um, when Lutherwood says they're going to pay, we're going to pay. So we do always ask too, just a little bit of flexibility. Sometimes getting somebody into safe housing is the number one priority, and all that other administration stuff can be done retroactively. Like I said, if we say we're going to do it, we will make sure that it gets done. Because, like I said, we do understand the importance of getting all the paperwork together. We are also asking too that sometimes when we meet with participants, we try and keep it as short as possible. Like I said, a lot's going on. They're still thinking, I meet movers, I got to still get in there. I still have to do this like unit inspection, all those things. So trying to keep meetings as concise as possible, trying not to keep them waiting too long is also very, very helpful. And we will be there to help assist as well. Like we're there to help walk alongside our participants as best we can. Also meeting the participants. So as a building, liaison, or as a provider, or just someone who's managing the building or a super, having that individual introduce themselves to the participant, maybe not on the day of move-in when everything's kind of going all over, but within the next 2 to 3 days, so that the participant knows who they can talk to if they have a question. Like I said, a lot of our people may not have lived in housing for 10 years or more sometimes, and don't really know how to go about doing things, don't really know what they could do wrong. Sometimes participants go ahead and do things not knowing what they did was wrong, but didn't know who to ask either. So as a provider, being able to say, "Hey Bob, if you need any help with anything, please call me. If you don't know what to do, please call me." Because sometimes people will just assume they can do something, but knowing they have Bob to call and just say, "Hey Bob, like I'm thinking of doing this," you may retroactively, or sorry, very proactively prevent something from happening that could cause tenancy issues.
Mhm.
So just making sure you take the time to introduce yourself and creating that positive relationship with that individual and getting to know them just a little bit actually goes a really long way. The most successful tenancies have been the buildings where the supers and those who run it and the neighbors have actively put themselves out there and gave a helping, "Hey, how's it going, Bob?" Or "Let me know if you need something," or "I got an extra ottoman upstairs, Bob. Do you want it?" Those have been our most successful tenancies, where someone moving into an apartment actually feels like it's a home and they're wanted and they're welcome.
Mhm. Mhm.
Imagine someone going into a building thinking they're not wanted. They probably want to avoid everybody and therefore
Of
not
course.
asking any questions.
And looking for those friendships with folks from the street or wherever they're coming from who may not be the most helpful to their tenancy.
Absolutely. When someone is invested in their place because it is a home and they feel welcome, they put so much more energy into keeping it because they don't want to lose it and they know that they're welcome here. So I
Mhm.
mean that's another big part is trying to create that environment of a home. And I mean, I've heard this from real estate agents too. When they are renting to tenants, they always say what you should do is make sure you are there on the day of move-in or a couple days after to see how the move-in went, introduce yourself, get that relationship going. And sometimes some of them even bring like little like cookie baskets and things like that, just to say we love that you're here.
Mhm.
If we could have that from providers, maybe not a cookie basket, but if we could just have that friendly hello and integration piece, I think we would have a lot of successful tenancies with very good
Mhm.
relationships between providers and tenants.
And coming from a community engagement standpoint, I mean, that is a lot of legwork to get to the point where, your tenants feel comfortable enough welcoming a new person into their building.
Mhm.
Um, And again, hopefully, I hope you don't mind me just kind of throwing some ideas in here.
Oh yeah,
Um,
go ahead.
but if people have questions about someone moving in that they know is chronically homeless, because that happens, word spreads, people know things faster than we would like them to sometimes, just not shying away from those questions. If somebody says, are they dangerous? And saying, well, I can't tell you anything about, just say, you know what, in general, people coming from chronic homelessness, that's a stigma.
Mhm.
Generally, like, we wouldn't put someone in the building that we knew would be dangerous, because we all have
Exactly.
our screening processes to make sure to do the best that we can to make sure that doesn't happen. So just addressing stuff like that comes up and not shying away from those hard questions. And of course, if housing providers aren't sure how to answer those questions, yourself, myself, we can be great resources on how to
Yeah.
coach you through those conversations.
Absolutely. We're here to try and be an intermediate as best as possible to work kind of through that. And I mean, the other community resource that has just been absolutely outstanding for us as well are our CROW officers, community
Yes.
resource officers. They're there to try and make our community a lot more harmonious, and having them, come out and do speaks and address concerns and things like that are always super helpful. They have been lovely with our populations. They really understand the people that we are serving right now, and they're there to help protect them as much as anybody else. So, I
Mhm.
mean, when there are issues in a building, always try and reach out to them. They are there to try and see what they can do to de-escalate. They are a de-escalation uh, tool, more than anything else. They're not a punitive tool. They are there to de-escalate, make people feel safe, answer questions. So I always do say to providers when there are, conflicts in the building, on a big scale, not just like one or two one-offs, but like a big scale, I'm always suggesting let's bring in our resource officers, see what they can do, see if it can make some people feel a little bit more safe or have questions answered. But other than that, like, there are tons of resources out there that we can utilize to help um, expel stigma around the chronic homelessness.
Mhm. Absolutely. So I see that we are a few minutes over, but with 1 minute remaining, let's say, is there anything, any idea or thought that you want to leave the people watching with?
Just that, like I said, anyone is like a step away from it. Honestly, we're all in a position where one job loss, one paycheck miss could put us in a really bad situation. And that's what our population is facing. So just trying to have a little bit of compassion for the individuals and trying to understand that person underneath the label is so important. I have had so many wonderful experiences when a participant has said, I made a friend in the building. I have, somebody who shares books with me because we both like reading, or, someone who draws me pictures, or somebody who came over because he saw I was having a hard time cleaning my apartment and cleaned it with me. Like,
Mhm.
those have been such great moments. So I guess the biggest thing I could say to providers and individuals is, try and get to know the person, because they are a person underneath everything. And you may be surprised how much you like them, honestly. Like, they just can be great people.
Wonderful. All right, Amy, thank you so much for your time and talking with us today and dispelling some of that stigma. I really appreciate it. I know a lot of our providers will appreciate it as well. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for letting us have this conversation.
All right, take care.